Good evening, and welcome to New Foundation Unity. This is our fourth in the series of six classes that explore the faculty of judgment based on the judges of ancient Israel. We have two more classes after this. If you're having any technical difficulties, I'll just remind you to email mark@truthunity.net. And if you have questions or comments, or if you need some clarification of some point, please call, preferably at a stopping point, which is usually about 8 o'clock. And our number here, 816-301-6304. I'll repeat it again at around 8 o'clock. And so as we begin our time together, I invite you to close your eyes, turn within, and settle into that sacred place at the center of your being. That place from where righteous judgment springs. Where judgment not by appearance, but judgment as God judges. God judges all to be good. When we judge by appearance, our judgment takes a hit because appearances cannot be trusted. When we judge by popular opinion, our judgment suffers. Race consciousness is not a standard of truth. And so for a few moments in the silence, let us rest in that secret place of the Most High, that place of pure communion with the Source, from where right judgment occurs in the silence. And as we begin to return our attention to this time and this place, we give thanks that we have access to the source that is within us, that source of all good, the source of absolute good, the source from where righteous judgment emerges. And for that awareness of the truth, we do give thanks in the name and through the power of that living, loving Christ presence. Amen. We've covered now 3 judges, Deborah, Gideon, and last week, Jephthah. And tonight we're going to consider a very interesting judge, Samson. Each one of these judges represents a phase of judgment as it is linked with other faculties. You remember Deborah with very high discernment. We remember from where that discrimination came. She would sit in meditation under a palm tree. She had righteous judgment, and she teamed up with the faculty of will, Barak. We then had Gideon, who represented judgment as it was linked with the faculty of renunciation, denial, right? Faculty of denial, very faculty of elimination, which means get rid of that stuff in consciousness which is blocking our good judgment. And then last week we had Jephthah, an interesting character who aligned himself, worked with several faculties, but primarily love. And so I'd like to take just a few minutes to review Jephthah before we go on to Samson. I think you're familiar now with the cycle that all these stories begin with, and the people did evil in the sight of the Lord. This is a very clear statement of the law of cause and effect. It's like crucifixion and resurrection. It's like we go through this cycle over and over again in our own lives. Remember, the Lord is not a person. In the eyes of those people, the Lord was the law that Moses brought to them. And so the evil is always separating from the source, meaning separating from the law. And when we separate ourselves from the law, then there are consequences, and there is some form of suffering or oppression. And at that point, we cry out to that indwelling Lord and we say, what happened? Why did this happen to me? Please help, whatever form that takes. And then the presence of God, always there, gives some form of deliverance. And then the pattern repeats until another law is unwittingly or sometimes consciously violated. Excuse me. And then we go through it again. Jephthah was a good example of holding to the good in all situations. You may remember that he, amongst all his brothers, was the only one of the sons of Gilead whose mother was a harlot. And so the other brothers kicked him out and made sure he did not get any inheritance. And he went to the land of Tob. Land of Tob is the land of good. He went to a place where your inheritance can never be taken from you, where it's the land of absolute good. Any kind of good you can think of, that's the land of Tob. Well, the Israelites did evil in the sight of the Lord, and it turns out to be they were worshiping a god of the Ammonites. Ammonites represent that disorderly, ignorant thinking that arises out of simply going with what other people think, and it's very chaotic. Many conditioned sorts of reactions. That's Ammonites. So those Ammonites are a source of oppression from within us. And what happens? Our judgment is skewed. And so they realize we need to have Jephthah come back to help us fight these Ammonites. But Jephthah has good judgment. And he said, all right, I will come back, but only if you let me be the head. And they agreed. Spiritual judgment should always be at the helm, to discern what is good judgment and what is simply disorderly, chaotic, random thinking. So who are these brothers? These brothers, we could say, represent the established religious thought where things are pretty cut and dry. And if you were born of a harlot, well, there were certain rules concerning that. But you know what Jesus said about harlots? He said, even the publicans and the harlots shall enter the kingdom before these, meaning the self-righteous adherence to the letter of the law. And so, when Jephthah is the ruling thought in consciousness, there is success. So he becomes a deliverer and a judge. It's interesting to note how he deals with these Ammonites. He goes right directly to them and says, what do you have against me? And they say, well, you took our land. And Jephthah answered, no, we did not take your land. We were coming up from Egypt. We asked for passage through this land. You would not give it. And so we came, and we had to come around. And as a result, the Lord dispossessed you of your land. Now, if this was your God and your God dispossessed another's land, wouldn't you claim that it was yours? Well, the reasoning didn't prevent the battle, but it ensured the victory of spiritual judgment. Now, in the meantime, Jephthah utters another prayer. And he says, he prays, Lord, if you deliver these Ammonites and Ephraimites and all these people into my hand, then I make you a vow that the first one to greet me out of my house consciousness, right, that I will sacrifice to you. Well, that according to the actual law, he would not have been required to sacrifice his daughter. But it seems to me, metaphysically, that sacrificing his daughter kind of restores the balance. His mother was a harlot, and the daughter, representing that incipient feeling nature, represents purity. And so in sacrificing this purity and giving his daughter in consecration to the temple, that somehow justice has been served. Always, if you have other thoughts on this, you can. But human sacrifice was no more allowed according to the law of Moses. All right, so that happens. And then what happens next is that the Ephraimites, all right, Ephraim, that's the faculty of will, but at this stage it is personal will. And they say, now, when you fought against the Ammonites, why didn't you invite us to come and help you? And Jephthah says, I did, and you refused. So here again, just confronting them with that their own disorderly thinking. And so, in the end, he wipes out 42,000 Ephraimites. And this is very interesting because Jephthah lives in Gilead. Gilead, that mound of witness, that high place in consciousness from where you see the big picture. And so the Ephraimites, who were defeated, wanted to pretend like they were from Gilead, and they tried to get back in. And Jephthah said, well, you have to pass a test. And so the test was, he would say, are you from Gilead? And if they said yes, but they mispronounced the name, then that was the end. They had to pronounce the name Shibboleth. And the Ephraimites could not pronounce the H. The H is significant. H always signifies an expansion of spirit. Remember, Abram became Abraham. Sarai became Sarah. Okay. That breath of the Almighty. And that's what Gilead represents. And so if the Ephraimites couldn't speak that language, being stuck in their own personal will, that was the end of them. And it says that Jephthah slew 42,000. 42,000. That means a foundation in duality, dual consciousness. And with a foundation in duality, you can never enter into that secret place of the Most High. And it says that he judged Israel for 6 years. 6 is a number which means the Trinity on the inside, the Trinity working on the outside. And so that was Jephthah. So that form of disorderly thinking does not produce good judgment. Have you ever found yourself in a sort of conditioned reaction to something. You react to something without even looking. And that's because the subconscious has a pattern embedded in it that only accepts information according to that which reinforces what it already has there. And so Jephthah was one of those more influential judges. In between Jephthah and Samson is what we're going to talk about next, there were three inconsequential judges. There's just a couple of lines that named their names. Nothing about what they did or what the oppressor was. And so we come to Samson. And starting with, if you have your Bibles, I invite you to turn to chapter 13. The whole story of Samson is between chapters 13 and chapter 16. In chapter 13, starting with verse 1, "And the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord gave them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years." All right. Now, what we see here is the first two pieces of that cycle. We have the apostasy. They did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. That is, they worshiped something else before God, and they were oppressed by the Philistines for 40 years. It never says that the people cried out for deliverance. Why? Because 40, that has established a firm foundation in consciousness. Those Philistines were so entrenched that the people could not even rise up, cry out against them. Philistines represent a consciousness of physicality that is dominant in consciousness. Anything physical desire for anything. Most have interpreted Samson to be dominated by sexuality, but that is not the case. We can have any number of addictions to, let's say, how about smoking? How about overeating? How about desiring any kind of substance to excess, any kind of indulgence? It could be video games, it could be shopping, and of course it could be sex, but it's more just going with that impulsive desire for something in the outer world. Well, so the people are not crying out to the Lord, but somehow the Lord feels the oppression, because Samson was consecrated before birth to the temple. He was the one who was to deliver the Israelites from the Philistines before he was even born. Now, I want you to think about this. We are all consecrated before we are born to the service of the Lord. We are all here to overcome just simply a consciousness of the physical. We are all here to express God fully. We are all here with certain gifts and qualities. We are here to express those qualities through a path of service that uplifts the entire environment around us. And so Samson simply represents what's true of all of us. Before Abraham was, I am. The Christ was created. The Christ is not created, the Christ is the idea of God. It's always been there, and it's implanted within every one of us. So here's Samson's birth. We read about his birth. He was born to, the man's name was Manoah. Manoah means state of rest. Okay, that state of rest, that place of silence within us, that was his father. And his mother, I will read you the account of his birth. And the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman. She was barren and she had no children. Behold, you are barren and have no children, but you shall conceive and bear a son. Sound familiar? Sound like the Annunciation to Mary? Therefore, beware, and drink no wine or strong drink, and eat nothing unclean. For lo, you shall conceive and bear a son. No razor shall come upon his head, for the boy shall be a Nazarite to God from birth, and he shall begin to deliver Israel from the hand of the Philistines. He will begin. And you'll see that the job is not complete until David becomes king. So, Nazarite, it means, in those days, it means you don't cut your hair. Is the source of strength in hair? No. But we'll talk about that when we get to Delilah. All right. We see that Samson violates every one of these caveats. All right. Right away in the beginning, and so do we. So do we. We do take in unclean thoughts, impure thoughts. We do drink, that is, we do appropriate strong drink, which meant alcohol, which completely disrupts your sense of good judgment. And as far as the hair goes, the hair is a symbol of strength, but it is not the source of Samson's strength. All right. Now, this is interesting because that angel of the Lord appeared to the woman, and she has no name. So it's the generic intuition. A vision comes to the intuition. And then, so she tells her husband, and then the woman came and told her husband, a man of God came to me, and his countenance was like the countenance of the angel of God, very terrible. Terrible meaning so bright that it frightened her. I did not ask him. Let's see, came to me. I did not ask him whence he was, and he did not tell me his name. But he said to me, behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. And so then drink no wine or any strong drink, and eat nothing unclean, for the boy shall be a Nazarite to God from birth to the day of his death. As I said, That's all of us. We are all consecrated to God's service from the time we are born until the end of our earthly existence. So what she does is she goes and tells her husband. Now her husband, Manoah, represents the intellect. He's very much like Joseph, and he wants to ask questions. Very funny, isn't the intellect always the part of us that says, well, how do you know? Well, what was his name? Those doubts arise sometimes when we have an intuition that seems unlikely, and so we run it by the intellect, and the intellect questions the validity of it. And so here's the man. Then Manoah entreated the Lord and said, O Lord, I pray thee, let the man of God whom thou didst send come again to us and teach us what we are to do with the boy then when he is born. And God listened to the voice of Manoah, and the angel of God came again to the woman as she sat in the field. Here's Manoah asking, and the intuition comes to the woman. He went to her because her husband was out in the field. He was not there. And the woman ran in haste and told her husband, Behold, the man who came to me the other day has appeared to me. And Manoah arose and went after his wife and came to the man and said to him, Are you the man who spoke to this woman? And he said, I am. And Manoah said, Now, when your words come true, what is to be the boy's manner of life, and what is he to do? And the angel of the Lord said to Manoah, Of all that I said to the woman, let her beware. Okay. She may not eat of anything that comes from the wine, neither let her drink wine or strong drink, or eat any unclean thing. All that I commanded her, let her observe. He said absolutely nothing different. So then Manoah says, well, want to know your name, because if I know your name, then I can go and get an offering and make you an offering. And the angel of the Lord says, no, if you go bring an offering, if you detain me, then I'm not going to eat the food. Okay, this is hospitality. He wants to invite him in. And the Lord says, but if you want to make an offering, make it to the Lord. And so this is very much like almost word for word, like with Gideon, when he goes and prepares an offering, puts it out on a rock, and whoosh, the fire comes and consumes it. And so both Manoah and his wife fall on their face, and that is the validation that this indeed is the angel of the Lord who is prophesying the birth of their son. All right, so why do you ask my name? Why do they ask? That's what Moses asked. Who shall I say sent me? What about a name? A name, our secret name is I am. Our sacred name, that is the name of God. But to have a name like a human being, then that is, a violation, because thou shalt have no other gods before me, and you shall not have any graven images, and so on. Okay, now, Samson was born in, and I'm not sure I can pronounce this correctly, but it looks like Manhandedrin, something like that, which means camp of judgment. So he was born into this camp of judgment somewhere between, and there's two names here, and you can look them up if you like, but it represents the subconscious. So the subconscious is part of our makeup. And the way to escape that is with this other name, Estahol, which means prayer, which is the way of escape from the dominance of the Philistines. Is that not true? How else are we to rid ourselves of these subconscious habits of just conditioned reaction according to whatever we've come in with, but also whatever parents and teachers and ministers and all kinds of beliefs from race consciousness, that's all in our subconscious. And without that going into the silence and visiting the source on a regular basis, then that's in control. Those Philistines there are in control. And they distort our judgment. And so that is the way we overcome the Philistines, going within. Remember, Manoah was a place of rest. Okay. So, Philistines can mean a lot of things, and it means different things, but it's basically indulging in any habit that becomes more important than God in your life. And quite often, when there's inner conflict between the thinking and the feeling, the heart and the mind, then the awareness goes to something, a third thing, which becomes an addiction because it becomes a way of getting out of conflict. So the first thing, once Samson begins his work, the Israelites have been under the dominance of the Philistines for these 40 years. And who are the Philistines? Here, historically, the Philistines migrated from the Aegean region, and hence their names mean, the name Philistine means migrating or wandering or changeable, and that's pretty much a description of disorderly thinking. No system, no standard. And so we have a series of incidents where, and this is typical of us too, we are betrayed by life's experiences. What's Judas? Judas represents the faculty of life. And Jesus was betrayed because that's the only thing that can betray us, is when we give our more importance to honor and status and wealth and anything, a job that makes us rich and famous, rather than something that we are called to do. Do you see? And so it starts out, he wants to get married. And so he is down there visiting the Philistines, and he sees a girl that he falls in love with. And this is This is, she is living in this region of Timnah, which had been allotted to the tribe of Dan. Judgment, all right? Dan represents that immature state of judgment. And on his way, he encounters a lion who is roaring at him. And he kills the lion, just like it was a lion destroying a kid. And so he goes on to meet his prospective wife. And on his way back, he discovers that there is a swarm of bees on the carcass of the lion that he has just killed, and there is honey there. So here's the first betrayal, all right? The honey is sweet, but it's on a carcass, and he's not supposed to touch dead things, but he does. Even if you are a child of God, as we all are, even if you are consecrated before birth, there are still laws that have to be obeyed. And one of those is that we don't appropriate, take into our minds, bodies, hearts, anything that is impure. And the honey was sweet, but it was coming from a carcass. He took the honey home. He had to scrape it, so he actually touched the lion's body. He took it home, and to his parents, and guess what? He did not tell them that the honey had come from a carcass. So, violation. Don't we do that sometimes? We know something is not a good idea, but we decide we're going to go with it anyway, and just kind of not tell where it came from. Okay. So they get married, and as you recall, marriages go on for 7 days. They're great big drunken feasts. And on the 4th day, Samson gets this idea of how he can sort of work something that will subdue the Philistines. It says the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and so he gets this insight that he's going to deprive some of these groomsmen that came to be in attendance in this wedding. There's 30 men there, and he says, if you can guess this riddle, then I will give you 30 garments made of linen, and they'll be festive for festal occasions. And excuse me. And if you don't guess the riddle, then you have to give me 30 garments. Now, garments metaphysically mean aura or energy field around you. Okay? So here's the riddle. The riddle is, okay, let me see. Here we go. The riddle, out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. And they could not in 3 days tell what the riddle was. So what do? They go to his wife. They entice her to tell them the secret, which she only lets them know about on the seventh day, that last possible day. But it was on the fourth day that they came to her, and on the seventh day she revealed to them. They kept sort of wearing her down. Now, what is this like within us? This is like we have to kind of coax something that we let me start over with that. He's angry because he thinks that she slept with these guys, and she did not. They simply enticed her. She was a Philistine, and they said if she didn't tell them the answer to the riddle, that they were going to burn her house down with her in it. So there was this fear. So when we are confronted with this challenge and we go into a fear mode, we are likely to sell our secrets. Yes, so she betrayed. This was the first betrayal. His desire for this woman betrays him by giving up the secret. So he is furious, and he goes and kills 30 men, takes the spoils so that it can pay off the groomsmen who had enticed the answer to the riddle from his wife. He then goes back to his father. Now, there is the first situation. Remember, 30 men. Now, he goes back, and I'll read you. He wants to go into his wife, and finds that her father says, sorry, you can't, that I thought you hated her, and I've given her away to your best man. Oh, so things have escalated here. And he says, this is the time of the wheat harvest. Samson went to visit his wife with a kid and said, I will go in to my wife in the chamber. But her father would not allow, and he said, I really thought that you utterly hated her, so I gave her to your companion. Is not her younger sister fairer than she? Pray take her instead. And Samson said to them, this time I shall be blameless in regard to the Philistine when I do them mischief. Well, he does more than mischief. Remember, this is the wheat harvest. And he gathers 300 foxes. All right, now, so we've gone from 30 to 300. And these foxes all have torches tied to their tails. And he sends them into the wheat fields. And they burn up the entire harvest. Well, that brings retribution. All right. So then the Philistines have to get even. And so this continues to escalate. And they follow him into Gilead. And the elders of Gilead, he wants some safe haven. And the elders say to him, are you not aware that the Philistines rule over us? You have really done them harm. And so they're pursuing him. The Philistines are pursuing him. And so comes up with this idea. He says, bind me and take me out to them, but promise you won't kill me. Because, of course, he knows he can get out of any ropes and so on. So that's what happens. So they tie him up and deliver him to the Philistines, and he takes with a jawbone, he slays 1,000 with a jawbone. That place is named, called the Valley of the Jawbone. Well, that's not the end of it. This goes on. Each time there is an act of violence against the Philistines come back with an act of violence. And, it kind of destroys that notion that you can ever permanently gain anything. He thought that when he burned their harvest, that would be the end of it. He says, I'm going to quit. I'm just going to do this one thing, and then I'm going to quit. But he doesn't. And after this big battle, he says, it says he was very thirsty, and he called on the Lord and said, Thou hast granted this great deliverance. All right, he's giving thanks now that the Lord delivered him. And now am I to die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised? So he's saying, please don't let me die at their hands. I thirst. Jesus said that on the cross. I thirst. And we thirst. We thirst after God. We hunger and thirst for righteousness. All of our desires are always desires for more of God. And like Moses, you see these recurring incidents. And like Moses, a fountain springs out from this jawbone. Out of every misfortune, some good comes. And so out of the jawbone with which he slew all these men, a living fountain comes up and satisfies his thirst. That was just like Moses went on the rock and water sprang up. But it doesn't stop. So then he goes to visit a harlot. It's always at the hands of a woman that he's betrayed. It's always because of his desire, not for women necessarily, but things physical. And what does she do? He went into the harlot, and so she tells the people of Gaza that Samson is there. She just tells him, sells him out. And so then they devise a plan, and of course he manages to escape. And then he comes to Delilah. Delilah means exhausted. When we're constantly at war, when we're constantly desiring and having to go through this cycle of desire that leads to a memory, that leads to a reaction, it's exhausting. And so he marries Delilah. And by this time, the Philistines are on to him. And she is entrusted to find the secret of his strength. And they try 4 different times to wring the secret from her. And it's only on the 4th time that he tells her that it's really that he was consecrated as a child, and he is a Nazirite, and you cannot shave his head. But he starts out saying, if you tie me up with fresh bowstrings, and then if you tie me up with new ropes. And then he gets a little closer and says, if you weave the 7 locks of my hair into a knot and put a pin through it. And then she does all these things. You'd think he would catch on. But, and then she would say, Samson, Samson, the Philistines are coming. And so he would get up and, and with the kind of strength he had, he would destroy them. And so she pulls her card and she says, you don't love me. If you truly loved me, you would tell me your secret. And so that's when he does. He tells the secret, and actually it's not the hair that is the secret, but he believes, and everyone believes it is the secret. The real source of his strength is that sacredness of the vow that is made to the Lord. We all start out in life thinking that we are going to be perfect. Oh, I don't know, maybe we don't think that, but thinking that I am God's child, I am going to do everything right. And then, of course, we're tempted and we violate these things. And the hair is simply a symbol. It is a symbol, but it's a symbol, and here's why it came to be thought of as a symbol. Because when they would look at a corpse, the hair appeared to continue growing. In reality, it was the scalp that was shrinking, and the hair was not doing anything. But there are still people today who believe that they cannot cut their hair, that it will deprive them of their energy, and so they wait until the full moon so that they can get energy and still cut their hair. Anyway, that's the origin of that. And so they finally capture him. They take him to the temple and they put him in prison. What does he do in prison? He has to mill the wheat. Is that not perfect? Here he burns their harvest of wheat. Now he's in prison and he has to grind the wheat. Action and reaction. Thoughts in mind produce after their kind. Always after an action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Now here's the ending of the Samson tale. There's a big festival to the Philistine god called Dagon. And they have all this drunkenness and all this rebelling. And they decide that they want to torture Samson for their sport. And so they have him brought up, and they tie his hands to the two pillars. It's very reminiscent of an actual crucifixion. So here are his hands tied, tied out like this. And not only is he put in prison, but they gouge out his eyes. Eyes representing spiritual perception. But the physical eyes are deceiving. They see good and evil. They see right and wrong, good and bad, duality. And so for the first time, while he is being tortured, he cries out to God. And his hair has begun to grow just a little bit. And his prayer is, God, give me the strength to pull down this temple, to at least give me back one eye. So very symbolic that they gouged out his two eyes, and he wants one eye. He wants to see with that single eye. And so the strength is renewed, and he asks someone, please help me touch please take off the rope so I can feel the edges of the pillars of the temple. And then with this incredible strength, he pulls the entire temple, including the roof. And how many thousands die? And he asks that he die with them. So he does not complete the job. But I just want to read you this description. Now, the lords of the Philistines gathered to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to rejoice, for they said, our God has given Samson, our enemy, into our hand. And when the people saw him, they praised their God, for they said, our God has given our enemy into our hand, the ravager of our country, who has slain many of us. And when their hearts were merry, they said, call Samson, that he may make sport for us. So they called Samson out of the prison, and he made sport before them. They made him stand between the pillars before them. They made him stand between the pillars, and Samson said to the lad who held him by the hand, let me feel the pillars on which the house rests. The two pillars upon which the consciousness of duality, human consciousness, rests. Let me feel them, that I may lean against them. Now the house was full of men and women. All the lords of the Philistines were there. And on the roof there were about 3,000 men and women who looked up on while Samson made sport. So we've gone from 30 men to 300 foxes to 3,000 that were slain. Okay. Then Samson called to the Lord and said, O Lord God, remember me, I pray thee, and strengthen me, I pray thee, only this once, O God. Have you ever prayed that way? And say, if you will only save me this one time, I will tithe. I will go to church on Sunday. Whatever promise you want to make to try and convince God to remember you. That I may be avenged upon the Philistines for one of my 2 eyes. And Samson grasped the 2 middle pillars upon which the house rested, and he leaned his weight upon them, his right hand on the one and his left hand on the other. And Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." Then he bowed with all his might, and the house fell upon the lords and upon all the people that were in it. So the dead whom he slew at his death were more than those whom he had slain during his life. Then his brothers and all his family came down and took him and brought him up and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of Manoah, his father. He had judged Israel 20 years. Okay, 20, that number of duality. It is 8 o'clock, so I am willing to open the phone to take questions. Again, the phone number 816-301-6304. So if you have any questions about the metaphysical interpretation of this, Samson, the name Samson means sun, S-U-N, sun, which represents understanding. It wasn't until the end that he demonstrated a kind of humbling, that he understood that he needed 1 eye, not 2 eyes. That if it took his life to defeat these Philistines, he would do it. So it was like a rising of purely physical strength to the level of spiritual strength that he was going to persist in his task. Strength, think of the disciple of Jesus who represented strength, which was Andrew. Andrew was the brother of Peter, faith. And it is Andrew that supports Peter. So when our faith wavers, Andrew is there to persist and to persevere. That is the faculty of mind that allows us to keep on keeping on, the power of the mind to accomplish. And so Samson is quite persistent in this task of overcoming the Philistines. First, he tries to get his good at their expense with this riddle. Then it becomes primarily revenge and burns their fields. And he said, that's it. I'm just going to burn their fields and we're going to call it quits. But no, then they take revenge. They kill his wife. They kill her father. And so the cycle goes on. This law of cause and effect is always at work. And remember, the way to overcome that cycle is to go beyond it, to go to that transcendent place in the silence where there is only one. We are one, but we only have faith in that one when we experience that one in the silence of our being. So he made progress in defeating the Philistines. He did not complete the job. 816-301-6304. And what else can we say about Samson? If we look at a verse in Isaiah, chapter 40, verse 31, but they who wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Good evening.
Good evening. I am enjoying this lesson.
Yes. Who am I speaking with? Who am I?
Alita.
Alita?
Alita.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay. I was wondering, when you think about three, the number three, you're always thinking about the Trinity. I can't really pick it up in here, but there's a lot of threes and
yes.
threes to a greater power.
Yes.
Could you
yes.
explain the significance of three?
Yes. There are threes. All right. Three does represent the Trinity, and there are three levels of being. There is spirit, there is soul, which in unity constitutes our thinking and our feeling, all the thoughts and feelings in the conscious and subconscious mind. Modern terminology, we say consciousness. So spirit, soul, and it's through the soul that we build the body. So the threes means that Trinity is functioning. He's thinking to, like in the 30 men, for instance, he tries to subdue them with a trick to really take advantage of their ignorance in order to get some cash from them. And what that means is that his spirit, his soul, and his body, and remember, these are all characters and phases of consciousness within us. So his whole being was trying to defeat these Philistines. And then we get to the 300 foxes. Now, every time you add a zero, you intensify it. So the level of the intensity, if it were some, positive act, that would also be magnified. But he is completely dominated by Philistines, even though he is consecrated to God, as we all are. And then when we get to the end, there were 3,000 in that temple of the Philistines, and so they all went down at once. And so this time he was using his physical strength to destroy the foundation of their temple, so that the apostasy upon which that apostasy rested was completely destroyed. So that's what the three is about. Always a current of consciousness that is working in spirit. It's working in consciousness that is thinking and feeling, and it's working in the body. It means the whole being is totally focused in one direction. It's only at the end, and the difference here is that he finally calls on God to deliver. He realizes that it's not his strength that is going to do it, not human strength that is going to do it, but it is that inner strength that comes from the real source, which is God, and it comes from a single eye, not from the eyes of human consciousness. Does that help?
Okay. It helped a lot.
Oh, good.
Thank you so much.
Yes, you're welcome. Thank you for calling.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Okay. Good question. I expected more questions. So if you, anyone else at home who's watching, 816-301-6304. So we've talked about the symbolism of Samson, sun-like. All right, sun-like. Like, remember Solomon. David had to confront the Philistines in the form, remember he desired Bathsheba so much that he resorted to some pretty bad behavior, arranged for her husband to go be killed in battle so that he could have her for himself. And oh, what happened? Their first child died. But when he faced up and said, "Purge me with hyssop, make me cleaner than snow," the second son was Solomon, son man, all right, who was wise. Good judgment. You remember what Solomon did. He was a judge who judged from his intuition. When the two women came to him, they had both had babies, and one of the babies had died, and the mother of the child who had died stole the baby from the other woman, and they brought the situation to Solomon, and he said, "Oh, get a sword, cut the child in half." And of course the real mother came forth and said, "No, please don't do that." The mother who was lying said, "Well, if I can't have him, may as well kill him." All right. So Solomon knew how to get the right answer from intuition. And good evening.
Hi, Eleanor. This is Kay.
Hi, Kay.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. You have a question?
I'm confused about the one eye. I don't see where it talks about him asking to, what that represents and where that is.
Well, Jesus, if you're familiar with the passage, and I don't have it at the tip of my tongue right now, but Jesus said, "If thine eye be single, then your whole body is filled with light." All right. And so when we are able to observe a situation, to see a situation from the perspective of the whole, then we judge righteous judgment. All right. When we judge by appearances, we see good and evil. But from the source, we see the whole picture and see that overall, even amidst the duality, there is good that comes from it. Judgment and justice are pretty much equivalent in the Old Testament. And so with righteousness comes right judgment, from which comes justice. And so the example I just gave of Solomon is an example of right judgment. When the Lord asked Solomon what he would like to have, Solomon asked for an understanding heart. Okay, understanding, that has to do with judgment, and heart judging with love. And God said, since you've asked for that, I'm going to give you everything else. So as well. And so Solomon became so wise and so wealthy that people came from all over to ask questions of him. And so that's what comes from the single eye. Remember in the Garden of Eden, part of the difficulty of Adam and Eve, what it was that desire for experience, that desire to evolve and experience the relative world, that led to, because we weren't fully aware in consciousness, that's what led to seeing good and evil. That's why in the Old Testament you hear over and over again, obey the Lord and you are blessed, disobey the Lord and you are cursed. Okay, and so that's how when they knew when they were on track that everything went well, and when they deviated and they worshiped foreign gods and other things, that things did not go so well. So that's kind of the theme of the Old Testament, at least in Moses' time and after. But so the single eye, look up the passage in the New Testament, and always in these stories, particularly in this story, you see that the punishment fits the crime, pretty much. So he burns the wheat fields, the harvest, and he has to grind the grain, do hard work to help them restore. He acknowledges, he affirms his own thirst. He acknowledges that he desires more of God. And he said, I'm thirsty, just like Jesus did on the cross. And a fountain springs up out of the jawbone, out of the, this jawbone, this piece of bone with which he slew all those people. And so always, when you ask for help, spiritual help, it's always there. But that's the first time when he asks for water, and then when he asks for to have one eye to replace the two. So it's a perfect solution. But thank you. I appreciate that you called with a question. I would like to hear more questions and comments from everyone, and I'm so glad that you're not too shy to call.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you. I just couldn't find where he'd asked for the one eye.
And it's in the very last. He says, I can read you that part because I'm pretty much right here in Judges. He says, just give me a moment here to flip to Samson. Okay, it's in chapter 16.
Okay. It's in a note in the Bible that I'm reading where it says,
okay,
or so that I may be avenged upon the Philistines for one of my two eyes.
Yes, that's right.
It's in a footnote.
Yes.
It's not in the passage itself.
And isn't that the best way for revenge, is to accept one eye for the two they took? So you gain when you let go of duality, you gain in unity. One eye, seen with that single eye. And that one eye says absolute good, that no matter how things appear, God is present. God is at work in the situation. And it was there that he recognized it. So he grew in understanding, which made him son-like, S-U-N, more like the son, more like Solomon, who grew in wisdom and understanding. So, yes, it's at the very end. That's where he says that. But there are so many references to other parts of the Bible throughout this whole book of Judges. And you'll see next week we have another miraculous birth with Samuel. Same situation. Samuel is born to a barren woman, and she is so grateful. She consecrates him to the temple, and he grows up in the temple, and he becomes the last of the judges and the kingmaker. So he's judge, prophet, and kingmaker, which leads us into a new period of history.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm going to hang up so somebody else maybe can call.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your call. Good night.
Good night.
Well, we're out of time, but I will leave the phone open. And so for the last 2 minutes, I'll just ask you to close your eyes and just be still for a moment and absorb the message of this lesson, that the way to subdue the Philistines in consciousness, all those desires that say, this is more than God, this I have to have, the way to subdue that is to go into the silence of your own being, that place of rest, the transcendent secret place of the Most High. A good lesson for all of us, and we say, thank you, God. And so, as we conclude our time together, if you would care to contribute to the maintenance of the new foundation, I invite you to take your love offering in your hand, and we always bless our offerings with the awareness that the source is infinite, that at the source of our being there is infinite substance that is waiting to express as our prosperity. And as we give, so we receive. God has already given us all that there is to have. And now is our chance to give in fulfillment of that universal law of circulation. So as we send our gifts forth, we bless them, affirming divine love through me blesses and multiplies all the good I give and all the good I receive. Thank you, God. And I thank you for watching the broadcast this evening. Tune in again next week. The next 2 weeks will be dedicated to Samuel and a kind of going back over some of these symbols. And I'll be happy to go over the numbers, since many do have questions about the meaning of numbers. Remember that every single chapter number, every single verse has a meaning. But the first time through, I want you to get a general idea of how the story relates to a condition in consciousness that applies to you. So, thank you, good evening, God bless you, and I hope to be with you next week, next Thursday, next 2 Thursdays at 7 o'clock Central Time. Good night.